The iron had burned through her dress and seared her flesh like she was nothing more than livestock, and Victoria Lawson would carry that mark for the rest of her days, a permanent reminder that she had once been considered property by a man who called himself her owner. The summer of 1878 in Fort Stanton, New Mexico Territory, was merciless, the kind of heat that made even the lizards seek shade. And Victoria had been working at the Lucky Star Saloon for 3 weeks now, careful to keep her shoulders covered no matter how sweltering the air became inside the cramped wooden building. She had arrived in town with nothing but the clothes on her back and a desperate need to disappear, running from a past that had left its mark on her in the most literal sense possible. The saloon owner, a surprisingly decent woman named Martha who had seen her share of broken souls, had asked no questions when Victoria appeared looking for work, only gestured to the rooms upstairs and told her she could start serving drinks that evening. Fort Stanton sat nestled in the Lincoln County region, a military post turned settlement that drew soldiers, ranchers, outlaws, and everyone in between. The town had a reputation for being rough around the edges, but it also had something Victoria desperately needed: distance from Texas, distance from the ranch where she had spent 2 years of her life in a hell she would not wish on anyone, distance from the man who had held the brand. His name was Jacob Thornton, and he had owned the largest cattle ranch in West Texas, a sprawling empire built on the backs of men he paid barely enough to survive, and women he did not pay at all. Victoria had been 17 when her father died, leaving debts she could not hope to repay, and Thornton had appeared at her door with papers that claimed those debts now belonged to him, and by extension, so did she. The law had done nothing. The sheriff had been in Thornton's pocket, and Victoria had learned quickly that sometimes the law was just another tool for powerful men to use however they pleased. She had tried to run twice. The first time, they had caught her within a day and brought her back to face Thornton's cold blue eyes and colder justice. The second time, she had made it almost to the New Mexico border before his men had dragged her back. That was when he had decided she needed a permanent reminder of who she belonged to, and he had heated the brand they used on cattle until it glowed orange in the firelight, and he had pressed it to her left shoulder while 3 of his ranch hands held her down. The memory still made her sick. But Victoria had not given up. She had waited, planned, saved every scrap and penny she could hide away, and when a traveling merchant had come through offering passage west for anyone willing to work, she had slipped away in the dead of night and never looked back. That had been 2 months ago, and she had spent every day since looking over her shoulder, wondering if Thornton would send someone after her, wondering if the brand on her shoulder truly made her his property in the eyes of the law. The Lucky Star was busy on Friday evenings, filled with soldiers from the fort and cowboys from the surrounding ranches, all looking to spend their wages on whiskey and entertainment. Victoria moved between the tables with practiced efficiency, balancing trays of drinks and dodging wandering hands with the skill of someone who had learned to navigate dangerous waters. She wore a dark blue dress with long sleeves that covered her arms completely, and she had arranged her hair so it fell over her left shoulder, hiding the place where the fabric could not quite conceal the texture of scarred skin beneath. She was delivering drinks to a table of card players when she first saw him. He sat alone at a corner table, a tall man with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of whiskey in sunlight. He wore the clothes of a working cowboy: dusty leather vest over a worn shirt, denim trousers, and boots that had seen plenty of miles. His hat sat on the table beside him, and he was nursing a single glass of whiskey, watching the room with the careful attention of someone who had learned to notice things others missed. Something about him made Victoria pause, made her heart do a strange skip in her chest that she immediately tried to ignore. She had no business noticing cowboys or anyone else. She was here to work, to save money, to build a life where she answered to no one. And that left no room for the complications that came with men. But their eyes met across the crowded room, and she saw something in his expression that was different from the usual leering looks she received from customers. He looked at her like she was a person, not a serving girl or a pretty face or something to be used. Victoria forced herself to look away and continued with her work. The evening wore on, the saloon growing louder as the whiskey flowed and inhibitions lowered. Victoria had just finished cleaning up a spilled drink when she felt a hand grab her wrist, hard enough to hurt. She turned to find a red-faced soldier grinning up at her, his breath reeking of alcohol. "Come sit with me, sweetheart," he slurred, yanking her toward his lap. "I am working," Victoria said firmly, trying to pull her arm free. "Please let go." "I said sit," the soldier repeated, his grip tightening. Before Victoria could respond, a shadow fell across the table, and a calm voice said, "The lady asked you to let go." The soldier looked up, his drunken grin fading as he took in the tall cowboy standing beside him. Up close, Victoria could see that the stranger was probably in his mid-20s, with a strong jaw and a scar that cut through his left eyebrow. He was not holding a weapon, but something about the way he carried himself suggested he would not need one. "This is none of your business, cowboy," the soldier said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. "I am making it my business," the cowboy replied evenly. "Let her go." For a moment, Victoria thought the soldier might argue, but then he released her wrist with a disgusted sound and turned back to his drink, muttering something under his breath about meddling strangers. The cowboy waited until Victoria had stepped safely away before returning to his own table, as though nothing remarkable had happened. Victoria rubbed her wrist, feeling the throb where the soldier's fingers had dug in, and found herself looking at the stranger with new curiosity. Most men in this town would not have bothered to intervene, would have considered it none of their concern if a serving girl was being handled roughly. But this one had stepped in without hesitation, and then walked away without expecting anything in return. When the crowd finally began to thin near midnight, Victoria made her way to the stranger's table to collect his empty glass. He looked up as she approached, and she found herself momentarily lost for words under the directness of his gaze. "Thank you," she finally managed, "for earlier." He shook his head slightly. "No thanks needed. Man should know better than to put hands on someone who does not want them there." His voice had a slight drawl that suggested he was from somewhere south, maybe Texas, and Victoria felt a flash of panic before she reminded herself that Texas was a big place, and there was no reason to think this stranger had any connection to Jacob Thornton or his ranch. "Still," she said. "I appreciate it. You new in town?" he asked, and there was genuine curiosity in his tone, not the calculated interest of someone looking for information to use against her. "Arrived a few weeks ago," Victoria admitted. "And you?" "Been working at the Running Horse Ranch about 10 miles north of here since spring," he said. "Name is Marcus Nielsen." "Victoria Lawson," she replied, and it felt strange to use her real name after weeks of considering whether she should adopt a false one. But something about this man made her want to be honest, at least about the small things. "Well, Miss Lawson, it is a pleasure to make your acquaintance, even under these circumstances," Marcus said, and there was a hint of warmth in his expression that made Victoria's carefully constructed walls feel suddenly less sturdy. She was saved from having to respond by Martha calling her name from across the room, and she excused herself quickly, feeling Marcus's eyes following her as she walked away. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus became a regular at the Lucky Star, appearing every Friday and Saturday evening to occupy the same corner table, always nursing a single glass of whiskey that lasted him most of the night. He was unfailingly polite to Victoria, never demanding her attention, but seeming pleased when she had time to exchange a few words between her other duties. She learned that he had come to New Mexico from Kansas, that he was 26 years old, that he had been working cattle since he was 14, and had a way with horses that made him valuable to any ranch lucky enough to hire him. She told him almost nothing about herself, deflecting his gentle questions with vague answers that revealed little. But Marcus never pushed, seemed content to let her keep her secrets as long as she would talk to him about the weather, about the town, about anything at all. Victoria found herself looking forward to those Friday and Saturday evenings in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. She had sworn off men after what Thornton had done, had decided that independence was worth more than any fleeting attraction, but Marcus was different from anyone she had met before. He was patient where others were demanding, respectful where others were presumptuous, and when he looked at her, she felt seen in a way that had nothing to do with her appearance and everything to do with the person she was beneath the surface. The first Saturday in August was particularly brutal, the heat inside the saloon almost unbearable despite the open windows. Victoria had been on her feet for hours, and she could feel sweat trickling down her back, making her dress cling uncomfortably to her skin. She was carrying a tray of drinks when she stumbled slightly on an uneven floorboard, and the sudden movement caused her to gasp as pain shot through her shoulder, the old brand wound protesting the strain. She recovered quickly, delivering the drinks without incident, but when she glanced toward Marcus's usual table, she found him watching her with concern. He gestured slightly, indicating the empty chair across from him, and after checking that Martha was occupied with other customers, Victoria allowed herself to sink into it gratefully. "You all right?" Marcus asked quietly. "Just tired," Victoria said, which was not entirely a lie. "It has been a long evening. You should not have to work this hard," Marcus observed, and there was something in his voice that suggested he was not just talking about tonight. Victoria gave him a tired smile. "We all do what we must to survive." "That is true enough," Marcus agreed. He was quiet for a moment, then added, "You know, the running horse is looking for help in the kitchen. The cook is getting on in years, and she has been complaining that the work is too much for one person. Would pay better than serving drinks, and the boss is a decent man who treats his workers fair." Victoria felt a flutter of hope mixed with suspicion. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I think you deserve better than dodging drunk soldiers every weekend," Marcus said simply. "And because I would like to see you in a situation where you did not have to worry so much about who might put their hands on you." There was no hidden agenda in his words, no expectation of payment for the favor, and Victoria felt something in her chest loosen slightly. "I will think about it," she said softly. "That is all I ask," Marcus replied. The following Monday, Victoria rode out to the Running Horse Ranch on a horse borrowed from Martha, following the directions Marcus had carefully written out for her. The ranch was larger than she had expected, with a sprawling main house, several bunkhouses, a massive barn, and corrals that held dozens of horses. The owner, a weathered man named Samuel Brooks who had to be pushing 60, interviewed her briefly before offering her the job on the spot, explaining that Marcus had vouched for her character, and that was good enough for him. Victoria started work the next day, assisting the elderly cook, Alina, with preparing meals for the ranch hands. The work was hard but honest, and for the first time in years, Victoria felt like she might actually be building something resembling a normal life. She rented a small room in town near the saloon, and each morning she rode out to the ranch before dawn, returning after dark with aching muscles and a sense of accomplishment she had not felt in far too long. Marcus worked with the horses mostly, breaking wild mustangs and training them for ranch work. Victoria would catch glimpses of him throughout the day, usually in the corrals, moving with a patience and gentleness that seemed at odds with the rough and tumble world of cowboy life. The horses responded to him in a way that was almost magical, calming under his touch and his low, steady voice. They fell into an easy pattern of conversation during meals, when the ranch hands would crowd into the dining hall and Victoria and Alina would serve up heaping plates of food. Marcus always made sure to thank her, always asked how her day had been, and slowly, carefully, Victoria began to let down her guard around him. By late September, the brutal summer heat had given way to cooler days and chilly nights, and Victoria found herself actually enjoying the work at the running horse. She had become friends with Alina, who reminded her of the grandmother she had lost as a child, and several of the other ranch hands had proven to be decent men who treated her with respect. But it was Marcus who occupied her thoughts more and more frequently. Marcus, whose smile made her heart race. Marcus, who she found herself looking for whenever she stepped outside. She was falling for him. She realized one evening as she rode back to town, and the knowledge terrified her. Because falling for someone meant vulnerability, meant trust, meant eventually having to explain the brand on her shoulder and the past she had run from. And what man would want a woman who had been literally marked as another man's property? The first week of October brought unexpected rain, a blessing for the parched land but a challenge for ranch operations. Victoria was helping Alina prepare lunch when Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway, soaked through and muddy up to his knees. "Horse threw a shoe out near the north pasture," he explained. "I am going to need to walk him back, but I wanted to let Sam know I would be late getting back." "You look half drowned," Alina observed. "Come in and dry off before you catch your death." Marcus hesitated, clearly not wanting to track mud through the kitchen, but Alina was already bustling around, fetching towels and ordering Victoria to pour him some hot coffee. Victoria complied, grateful for something to do with her hands, and tried not to stare at the way Marcus's wet shirt clung to his broad shoulders. He accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping his hands around the warm cup. "Thank you, Miss Lawson." "Victoria," she corrected gently. "I think we know each other well enough by now that you can use my given name." Something shifted in his expression, a warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee. "Victoria, then, and you should call me Marcus." "I will," she promised. Alina excused herself to check on something in the pantry, leaving them alone in the kitchen, rain drumming steadily on the roof above them. Marcus set down his coffee and looked at Victoria with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Can I ask you something?" he said quietly. Victoria tensed instinctively. "You can ask. You do not have to answer if you do not want to," Marcus continued, "but I get the feeling you are running from something, or someone." The directness of the question caught Victoria off guard. She had been so careful, so guarded, but apparently not careful enough to fool Marcus's observant eyes. She considered lying, considered deflecting, but something about the genuine concern in his expression made her want to be honest. "I am," she admitted softly. "From Texas." "From a man who thought he owned me." Marcus's expression darkened. "A husband?" "No," Victoria said quickly. "Nothing like that. My father died with debts, and the man who held them decided that meant I belonged to him. He kept me working on his ranch for 2 years, would not let me leave. When I tried to run, he brought me back and—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "He hurt you," Marcus said, and it was not a question. Victoria nodded, feeling tears prick at her eyes despite her efforts to remain composed. She had not cried about what happened in months, had forced herself to be strong to survive, but something about finally telling someone made all those carefully contained emotions threaten to overflow. "I am sorry," Marcus said, and the sincerity in his voice nearly undid her. "No one should have to go through that, but you got away. That takes courage." "Or desperation," Victoria said with a bitter laugh. "Courage," Marcus repeated firmly. He reached across the table, palm up, offering without demanding. "You got away, and you are building a new life here, and that is something to be proud of." Victoria looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment before slowly placing her own in it. His fingers closed around hers, warm and solid and safe. And for the first time since arriving in New Mexico, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could actually put the past behind her. Alina returned then, breaking the moment, and Marcus reluctantly released Victoria's hand, making excuses about needing to get back to work. But as he left, he looked back at her with an expression that promised their conversation was not over, and Victoria found herself hoping it was not. The following Saturday, Marcus asked if he could walk her home after work. Victoria agreed, and they made their way through the quiet streets of Fort Stanton, talking about everything and nothing while the stars wheeled overhead. When they reached her boarding house, Marcus did not immediately leave, instead turning to face her in the lamplight spilling from the front window. "I want to be clear about something," he said. "I am not the kind of man who plays games or wastes a woman's time. I like you, Victoria, more than I have liked anyone in a long while, and I would very much like to court you properly if you would allow it." Victoria's heart hammered in her chest. She wanted to say yes, wanted it more than she had wanted anything in years, but the weight of her secret held her back. "There are things you do not know about me," she said carefully. "Then tell me," Marcus replied. "Or do not. I am not asking for your whole history, Victoria. I am just asking for a chance to see where this might go." She studied his face in the lamplight, searching for any sign of deception or hidden motives, but found only honest affection and patience. "All right," she finally said. "Yes, I would like that." The smile that broke across Marcus's face was worth every moment of fear and doubt. He reached for her hand again, raising it to his lips in a gesture that was both old-fashioned and utterly sincere. "Thank you," he said simply. Over the next few weeks, they fell into the rhythm of courtship, with Marcus finding excuses to be near her during work and walking her home every evening she worked late. They talked about their dreams for the future, about the places they wanted to see, about the kind of lives they hoped to build. Marcus told her about losing his parents to cholera when he was young, about being raised by an uncle who taught him everything about horses and cattle. Victoria shared carefully edited stories from her childhood, before her father died, before everything went wrong. But the brand remained her secret, hidden beneath long sleeves and careful positioning. The weather was cooling rapidly now as October gave way to November, so keeping covered was easy enough, but Victoria knew it could not remain hidden forever. If things continued with Marcus, if they became more serious, eventually he would see it, and she would have to explain. The thought filled her with dread. Because even though Marcus had been nothing but kind and respectful, she could not shake the fear that seeing the brand would change how he looked at her, would make him see her as damaged goods, as someone who had been owned by another man. But Marcus was not in a hurry to push their relationship faster than she was comfortable with, and Victoria found herself falling deeper for him with each passing day. He made her laugh with stories from the ranch, brought her wildflowers he picked while riding fence lines, and treated her with a gentleness that slowly convinced her that not all men were like Jacob Thornton. The turning point came in mid-November, when an early cold snap brought frost to Fort Stanton and Victoria developed a persistent cough from the long rides to and from the ranch in the frigid pre-dawn air. Elena, ever the mother hen, insisted she stay overnight in one of the spare rooms in the main house rather than make the journey back to town, and Samuel Brooks readily agreed. The room Elena showed her to was small but comfortable, with a real bed and a wash basin and a mirror on the wall. After the long day's work, Victoria was grateful to simply collapse onto the mattress, still fully dressed, too exhausted to bother with more than removing her boots. She fell asleep almost instantly, lulled by the warmth from the fireplace in the next room and the knowledge that she did not have to wake before dawn to make the ride back to the ranch. She woke sometime past midnight to find the fire had died down and the room had grown cold enough that her breath fogged in the air. Shivering, Victoria reached for the quilt at the foot of the bed, and in her sleep-fogged state, she forgot to be careful about how she moved. Pain lanced through her shoulder, sharp enough to make her gasp, and she pressed her hand to the brand through the fabric of her dress, feeling the raised scar tissue even through the layers. The wound had never healed quite right. The ranch Dr. Thornton finally allowed to see her had said there was infection that had scarred the tissue, would probably give her problems for the rest of her life. On cold nights like this, it ached with a deep, throbbing pain that made sleep difficult. Victoria struggled to her feet, moving to the wash basin to splash cold water on her face, trying to clear the fog of pain and exhaustion. She was so focused on her own discomfort that she did not hear the knock at the door, did not realize anyone was there until Marcus's concerned voice called softly, "Victoria, I saw your light under the door. Are you all right?" Panic flooded through her. She was not presentable, had not checked to make sure her dress was properly arranged, had not made sure her shoulder was covered. "I am fine," she called back, trying to keep her voice steady. "Just woke up cold." "Can I bring you more blankets?" Marcus offered. "That is not necessary," Victoria insisted, moving toward the door to prevent him from entering. But in her haste, she stumbled over her discarded boots and her hand flew out to catch herself on the doorframe. The movement pulled at her dress, dragging the neckline sideways, and when she looked up, she found Marcus standing in the doorway with an armful of quilts, his eyes locked on her exposed shoulder, more specifically, on the brand that was now clearly visible in the lamplight. Victoria felt the blood drain from her face. She scrambled to adjust her dress to cover the mark, but it was too late. Marcus had seen it, and the expression on his face was one of dawning horror. "Is that?" he began, then seemed unable to finish the question. Victoria wanted to run, wanted to disappear, wanted to be anywhere but here under the weight of his stare. But there was nowhere to go, and she had known this moment would come eventually. She forced herself to meet his eyes, to face whatever disgust or pity or rejection she saw there. "It is a brand," she said flatly. "The man I told you about, the one I ran from, he thought I was his property. When I tried to escape the second time, he decided I needed a permanent reminder of who owned me. So he used the brand from his cattle, burned it right into my shoulder." Marcus looked like he might be sick. He set the quilts down carefully on the bed, then turned back to her, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. But when he spoke, his voice was not filled with disgust or pity. It was filled with rage. "He branded you," Marcus said, each word precise and controlled. "Like you were cattle, like you were an animal instead of a human being." "Yes," Victoria whispered. For a long moment, Marcus just stood there, breathing hard, clearly fighting to control his emotions. Then he took a careful step toward her, his hands unclenching, his expression softening into something that looked almost like anguish. "May I see it?" he asked quietly. "Properly," Victoria hesitated, then slowly turned so her left shoulder was toward him, adjusting her dress so the entire brand was visible. She heard Marcus draw in a sharp breath, and she closed her eyes, unable to watch his reaction. She felt his fingers ghost over the scarred skin, feather light and impossibly gentle. "What was his name?" Marcus asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Jacob Thornton," Victoria said. "He owns the Triple T Ranch in West Texas, but it does not matter. I got away, and that is what matters." "That mark," Marcus said slowly, and Victoria heard him move closer, felt the warmth of him at her back. "Do you think it means you still belong to him?" Victoria felt tears spill over despite her best efforts. "I do not know," she admitted. "He had papers, legal documents that said I was working off my father's debts. I do not know if running away makes me a thief in the eyes of the law. I do not know if that brand gives him some claim to me that would hold up in court. I just know I could not stay there any longer." Marcus was quiet for a moment, and then he spoke words that Victoria would remember for the rest of her life. "That mark does not own you," he said firmly. "It is scar tissue and pain and a reminder of evil that was done to you, but it does not define you, and it certainly does not give any man claim to you. You are your own person, Victoria Lawson. You belong to yourself." Victoria turned to face him, tears streaming down her face, and found Marcus looking at her with an intensity that took her breath away. There was anger in his expression, but none of it was directed at her. There was sorrow, but it was for what she had endured, not because of any perceived failing on her part. And beneath it all was something else, something that looked very much like love. "You believe that?" she asked shakily. "With everything in me," Marcus replied. He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently cupped her face in his hands. "You are the strongest, bravest person I have ever met. What that man did to you was criminal and cruel, but it does not change who you are. It does not make you less. And it certainly does not give him any right to you." "But what if he comes looking for me?" Victoria asked, voicing the fear that had haunted her since she fled Texas. "What if he sends men to bring me back?" "Then he will have to go through me first," Marcus said, and there was steel in his voice that Victoria had never heard before. "And through Sam and every other man on this ranch who has seen what a good person you are. You have people here who care about you, Victoria. You are not alone anymore." The dam broke then, and Victoria found herself sobbing against Marcus's chest while he held her carefully, as though she were something precious that might break. He did not try to shush her or tell her everything would be fine. He just held her and let her cry out years of fear and pain and shame, and when she finally quieted, he pressed a kiss to the top of her head that felt like a promise. "I am sorry you saw that," Victoria said eventually, her voice muffled against his shirt. "I am not," Marcus replied. "Not because I am glad you were hurt, but because you should not have to hide it. You should not have to carry that burden alone. Let me help carry it with you." Victoria pulled back enough to look up at him. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you want to tie yourself to someone with this kind of history?" "Because I love you," Marcus said simply. "I have loved you since the first time I saw you, moving through that saloon like you were carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders and refusing to let it break you. I love your strength and your kindness, and the way you treat Alina like family, and the way you never complain even when the work is hard. I love all of you, Victoria, including the parts that have been hurt. Maybe especially those parts, because they show just how much you have survived." "I love you too," Victoria whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. But once they were out, she realized she meant them completely. "I have tried to keep my distance, but I cannot help it. I love you, Marcus." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, and Victoria felt something inside her that had been broken for years begin to slowly mend. When they finally pulled apart, Marcus kept his forehead pressed to hers, as though he could not bear to have any distance between them. "Marry me," he said suddenly. Victoria's eyes flew open. "What? Marry me?" Marcus repeated. "I know it is fast, and I know you might want more time, but I do not want there to be any question about where you belong. You are not a runaway with questionable legal status. You are my wife, and if Jacob Thornton or anyone else wants to challenge that, they can face me. And they can face the law, because no judge worth his salt would uphold a claim of ownership over a married woman." Victoria's heart raced. "You want to marry me to protect me?" "I want to marry you because I love you," Marcus corrected. "The protection is just a benefit. But yes, if you are my wife, legally married with all the proper documents, then any claim Thornton might have had is voided. You would be free, Victoria, truly free." It was tempting, so tempting that Victoria almost said yes immediately, but she forced herself to slow down to think. "This is not something to rush into just because you are angry about what happened to me." "I am not rushing," Marcus insisted. "I have been thinking about this for weeks now, long before tonight. I was just waiting for the right time to ask, and maybe this is not the most romantic proposal, but I mean every word. I want to spend my life with you, Victoria. I want to build a home with you, have children with you if you want them, grow old with you. And if marrying me means you can finally stop looking over your shoulder, then I want that for you too." Victoria searched his face for any sign of doubt or obligation, but found only sincerity. He truly meant it. He truly wanted to marry her, brand and past and all. The realization was overwhelming. "Yes," she said softly. "Yes, I will marry you." The smile that broke across Marcus's face was radiant. He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Victoria felt years of fear and shame begin to fall away, replaced by hope and love and the promise of a future she had never dared to dream of. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the Fort Stanton chapel, with Alina and Samuel Brooks as witnesses. Victoria wore a dress Alina helped her make, a simple blue cotton that she had embroidered with small white flowers, and Marcus wore his Sunday best, his hair freshly cut and his boots polished to a shine. The minister, an elderly man who had been performing marriages at the fort for 20 years, led them through the traditional vows, and when Marcus slipped a simple gold band onto Victoria's finger, she felt the last chains of her past finally break. They held a small celebration at the ranch afterward, with Alina providing food and several of the ranch hands bringing out fiddles and guitars for music. Victoria danced with Marcus under the New Mexico sky, feeling lighter than she had in years, and when they finally retired to the small house Samuel had given them on the ranch property, she felt truly free for the first time since her father's death. Their wedding night was gentle and unhurried, with Marcus taking care to be patient and tender, checking constantly that Victoria was comfortable. When he saw the full extent of the brand for the first time in good light, he traced his fingers over it gently and said again, "This mark does not own you. You are mine now if you will have me, and I am yours. We belong to each other." They made love slowly, learning each other's bodies and boundaries, and afterward, Victoria lay in Marcus's arms feeling safe and cherished in a way she had never experienced before. For the first time in years, she fell asleep without nightmares, without fear, just the steady beat of her husband's heart beneath her ear and the knowledge that she was finally, truly home. Life at the Running Horse Ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. Victoria continued working with Alina in the kitchen, though now she did so as the boss's head wrangler's wife rather than just hired help. Marcus worked long days with the horses and cattle, but he always made sure to be home for dinner, and they would spend their evenings together in their small house, talking about their days or reading or simply enjoying each other's company. Winter came to New Mexico with surprising intensity, bringing snow that blanketed the high desert landscape and made ranch work challenging. Victoria learned to manage the cold better, dressing in layers and keeping the fire in their home burning steadily. The brand on her shoulder still ached sometimes on particularly cold nights, but now when it did, Marcus would rub salve into it and hold her until the pain eased. Spring arrived with a burst of wildflowers and new foals, and Victoria discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She had never really imagined having children, had thought that future was lost to her when Thornton burned his mark into her flesh. But Marcus was overjoyed, and his enthusiasm helped calm her fears. Elena immediately took Victoria under her wing, sharing wisdom about pregnancy and childbirth, and declaring herself the baby's honorary grandmother. Samuel Brooks offered to build an addition onto their house to accommodate a growing family. The other ranch hands congratulated Marcus with backslapping and teasing about sleepless nights ahead. But as Victoria's belly began to swell with life, her old fears resurfaced. What if Thornton somehow found out where she was? What if he decided to come after her, to try to reclaim what he considered his property? She had legal protection now as a married woman, but that would only matter if the law was willing to enforce it. And she had learned in Texas that justice was not always blind to money and influence. Marcus noticed her increasing anxiety and finally confronted her one evening in late spring. "You have been looking over your shoulder again," he observed gently. "What has you worried?" Victoria hesitated, then admitted, "What if he comes? What if Jacob Thornton finds out I am here and decides to make trouble? I am carrying our child, Marcus. I cannot bear the thought of anything happening to this baby because of my past." Marcus pulled her close, careful of her growing belly. "Then we make sure we are prepared," he said. "Tomorrow I am going to ride into Lincoln and talk to the territorial marshal. I am going to explain the situation, show him our marriage certificate, and make sure there is a legal record of you being here as my wife, not a runaway. If Thornton shows up, he will find out quickly that you are under the protection of the law and of this ranch." True to his word, Marcus made the journey to Lincoln the next day and spent several hours with the territorial marshal, a stern but fair man named Harrison, who listened to the story and immediately filed official documents recognizing Victoria's status as a free woman and married citizen of the New Mexico Territory. He also sent inquiries to Texas about Jacob Thornton and the Triple T Ranch, wanting to know if there were any outstanding legal claims or warrants. The response came back 6 weeks later. Jacob Thornton was dead. He had been killed in a dispute with a neighboring rancher over water rights, shot down in his own front yard. The Triple T Ranch was being divided among his creditors, and there were no legal claims filed related to any missing workers or outstanding debts. When Marcus brought Victoria the news, she felt as though a massive weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Thornton was dead. The man who had branded her, who had stolen years of her life, who had haunted her nightmares, was gone. She could not muster any grief for his passing, only relief that he would never hurt anyone else the way he had hurt her. That night, she slept more soundly than she had since arriving in New Mexico, and when she woke the next morning, she felt as though she was truly seeing her future clearly for the first time. She was Victoria Nielsen now, wife of Marcus Nielsen, carrying their child, living in a place where she was respected and valued. The brand on her shoulder was a scar, nothing more, a reminder of what she had survived but no longer a symbol of ownership or shame. Their son was born on a sweltering day in August of 1879, arriving with a healthy set of lungs that he immediately used to announce his displeasure at being evicted from his comfortable home. They named him Thomas, after Marcus's late father, and Victoria fell in love with him the moment she held his tiny, squirming body in her arms. Marcus proved to be a devoted father, taking turns walking the floor with Thomas during sleepless nights and changing diapers without complaint. He would sit for hours with his son cradled against his chest, talking to him about horses and cattle and the wide open spaces they would explore together someday. Victoria healed slowly from the birth, with Alina fussing over her and insisting she rest more than she worked. By the time autumn arrived, she was back to her regular duties, though now with Thomas strapped to her back in a carrier Alina had fashioned for her, or napping in a basket in the corner of the kitchen where she could keep an eye on him. Life continued its steady rhythm through the changing seasons. Thomas grew from infant to toddler, taking his first steps in the spring of 1881 and speaking his first words shortly after. Horse, much to Marcus's delight and Victoria's amused exasperation. They discovered Victoria was pregnant again that summer, and their daughter Mary was born the following February, arriving during a late winter snowstorm that had Marcus pacing the floor anxiously while Alina assisted with the delivery. Mary was easier than Thomas had been, a calm baby who seemed content to observe the world with wide, curious eyes. Thomas adored his little sister, insisting on helping with everything from changing her clothes to singing her to sleep. The years passed in a blur of childhood milestones and ranch work and quiet evenings as a family. Samuel Brooks eventually retired and handed over management of the running horse to Marcus, recognizing his skill and dedication. Alina grew older but refused to fully retire, still overseeing the kitchen and training the younger women who came to work at the ranch. By 1885, Victoria and Marcus had added another son, named Samuel after Marcus's boss and friend, and their household was full of noise and laughter, and the organized chaos that came with 3 children under 6 years old. They had expanded their house twice to accommodate their growing family, and Marcus had begun buying cattle of his own, building a small herd that grazed on land he leased from the ranch. Victoria still had nightmares sometimes, still woke up feeling the phantom burn of the brand on her shoulder, but Marcus was always there to hold her and remind her that she was safe, that she was loved, that the past was past and could not hurt her anymore. And slowly, the nightmares became less frequent, the fear less sharp. One evening in late summer, when the children were finally asleep and the house was quiet, Marcus found Victoria sitting on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. He settled beside her, taking her hand in his. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. Victoria was quiet for a moment, then said, "About how different my life is now from what it was 7 years ago. About how I almost gave up hope that I could ever be happy again. About how lucky I am to have found you." Marcus squeezed her hand. "I am the lucky one," he insisted. "You are the strongest person I know, Victoria. Everything you survived, everything you overcame, it made you who you are. And who you are is extraordinary. The brand does not bother you." Victoria asked, voicing a question that still occasionally haunted her quiet moments. Knowing that another man literally marked me as his, Marcus turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "The brand is part of your history," he said. "It is a reminder of what you survived, of the strength it took to escape, of the courage you showed in building a new life. When I see it, I do not think about Jacob Thornton. I think about the woman who refused to let him break her, who ran across half the Southwest to find freedom, who learned to trust again even though she had every reason not to. That mark does not own you, Victoria. It never did. You own it, and you own your story, and I am honored that you chose to share that story with me. Victoria felt tears prick at her eyes, but they were good tears, tears of gratitude and love and profound relief. I love you, she said simply. I love you too, Marcus replied, pulling her close. Always. They sat together as the sun completed its journey below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and deep blue. From inside the house came the sound of one of the children stirring, and Victoria smiled, preparing to get up and check on them. But Marcus held her back for just a moment longer. We have built a good life, he said, and we are going to keep building it together for as long as we both shall live. Together, Victoria agreed, and the word felt like a promise, like a vow, like the truth that would carry them through whatever the future held. The years continued to unfold with the steady rhythm of ranch life. Thomas grew tall and serious, fascinated by the horses like his father before him. By the time he was 10 years old, he could ride as well as most of the ranch hands and had a gift for gentling even the most spirited animals. Mary proved to be a voracious reader, devouring every book she could get her hands on and constantly pestering her parents with questions about the world beyond New Mexico. Young Samuel was the wild one, always getting into mischief and coming home covered in mud or with scraped knees from some adventure. In 1887, Victoria gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Daniel and Grace. The pregnancy had been difficult, and the delivery even more so, leaving Victoria weak and exhausted. Alina moved into their house for 3 months to help with the newborns and the older children while Victoria recovered. Marcus reduced his hours at the ranch, spending more time at home to support his wife and wrangle their suddenly very large family. It was during those challenging months that Victoria truly understood just how much her life had transformed. She was surrounded by people who loved her, who supported her, who would do anything to help her. The isolation and helplessness she had felt on Thornton's ranch were nothing but distant memories now, replaced by the warm chaos of family life and community. By the time the twins were walking, Victoria had fully recovered her strength, though she and Marcus decided their family was complete at 5 children. The house they had expanded multiple times was bursting at the seams with life and noise and love. Victoria had taken over much of the ranch's administrative work, keeping books and managing supplies, while still helping Alina in the kitchen during busy seasons. Marcus had earned a reputation throughout Lincoln County as one of the finest horse trainers around, and ranchers from as far away as Texas came to purchase animals he had trained. The irony was not lost on Victoria that the very state she had fled from was now sending buyers to her husband, though none of them had any connection to Thornton or his ranch. In 1890, New Mexico was still a territory, not yet a state, but Fort Stanton had grown significantly since Victoria first arrived 12 years earlier. The town now boasted a proper schoolhouse where Mary excelled in her studies, a new church, several shops, and even a small library. Victoria had made friends among the other ranch wives and townswomen, and she found herself part of a community in a way she had never experienced before. Thomas turned 13 that summer and began working alongside his father officially, learning not just about horses, but about managing a ranch, about business, about the responsibilities that came with building a life in the high desert. He was a quiet boy, thoughtful and careful, and Marcus often told Victoria that their son had her strength and determination. Mary, at 11, had announced her intention to become a teacher, inspired by the schoolteacher in Fort Stanton who encouraged her love of learning. Victoria supported her daughter's ambitions wholeheartedly, determined that her children would have opportunities she had never been afforded. One autumn evening, as Victoria was putting Grace and Daniel to bed, her daughter asked, "Mama, what is that mark on your shoulder?" Victoria froze, the question catching her completely off guard. In the chaos of raising 5 children, she had almost forgotten about the brand, had grown so used to it being simply part of her body that she rarely thought about it anymore. But now her 7-year-old daughter was looking at her with innocent curiosity, waiting for an answer. Marcus appeared in the doorway, having heard the question, and gave Victoria an encouraging nod. They had known this conversation would come eventually. Victoria sat down on the edge of the bed, considering how to explain something so complex to a child. "When I was younger, before I came to New Mexico, I worked for a very bad man," she began carefully. "He hurt me and marked me with that scar. But I escaped from him and I came here, where I met your father. And your father helped me understand that the mark does not define me or control me. It is just a scar from something that happened long ago." "Did it hurt?" Daniel asked, climbing out of his own bed to come look at his mother's shoulder. "Yes," Victoria admitted. "Very much. But the hurt faded and I survived, and eventually I found a much better life here with all of you." "I am glad you got away from the bad man," Grace said solemnly. "So am I, sweetheart," Victoria replied, kissing both twins on their foreheads. "So am I." Marcus helped her tuck the children back into bed, and afterward they retreated to their own room, emotionally exhausted by the simple but profound conversation. "You handled that well," Marcus said, wrapping his arms around her from behind as she stood looking out their bedroom window at the star-studded sky. "I want them to know that survival is possible," Victoria said softly. "That even when terrible things happen, you can still build a good life afterward. I want them to be strong and compassionate and to understand that people are more than the worst things that have happened to them." "They will learn that from watching you," Marcus assured her. "You show them every day what strength looks like, what resilience looks like. They are lucky to have you as their mother." Victoria leaned back against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "We have built something good, haven't we?" "We have built something extraordinary," Marcus corrected, "and we are not done yet." The 1890s brought changes to New Mexico and to their family. Thomas left home at 18 to work on a ranch further north, wanting to prove himself independent of his father's reputation, before eventually returning to help run the running horse. Mary finished her schooling and began teaching at the Fort Stanton schoolhouse, boarding in town during the week and coming home on weekends. Samuel followed his older brother's footsteps with horses, while the twins developed their own interests as they grew. Alina passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1895, and Victoria mourned the woman who had been like a mother to her. They buried her in the small cemetery near the ranch, and Victoria made sure fresh flowers were placed on her grave every week. Samuel Brooks, who had never married, treated Victoria and Marcus's children like his own grandchildren, and when he died in 1897, he left the running horse ranch to Marcus outright, recognizing that Marcus had been running it for years and had earned the right to own it. By the turn of the century, Marcus and Victoria were in their 40s, their children mostly grown, and they found themselves entering a new phase of life. Thomas had returned to the ranch with a wife of his own, a practical young woman named Sarah who fit seamlessly into the family. Mary was engaged to a merchant from Lincoln. Samuel was courting a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property. On a warm evening in the spring of 1901, Victoria sat on the porch with Marcus, watching the sunset as they had done countless times over the past 23 years. The house behind them was quieter now, with only the twins still living at home, and Victoria found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. "You ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Tying yourself to someone with my history, taking on all the complications that came with me?" Marcus looked at her with surprise and something that might have been exasperation. "Victoria Nielsen, after 23 years of marriage and 5 children and a life we built together from nothing, you are still asking me that?" "I just want to be sure," Victoria said softly. Marcus took her hand, raising it to his lips in a gesture that had become familiar ritual over the years. "I have never regretted a single day with you," he said firmly. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me. That mark on your shoulder is part of your story, but it is not the whole story. The whole story is about a woman who survived something terrible and built a beautiful life anyway. It is about courage and strength and love, and I am grateful every single day that I got to be part of that story." Victoria felt tears prick at her eyes. After all these years, he could still make her feel cherished with just a few words. "I love you," she said. "I love you too," Marcus replied. "Always have, always will." They sat together as the sun painted the sky in brilliant colors. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something that would last long after they were gone. The brand on Victoria's shoulder had faded over the years, becoming just another scar among the many marks life leaves on a body. But the words Marcus had spoken to her that night so long ago remained as true as ever. That mark did not own her. She belonged to herself, and she had chosen to share her life with someone who understood that completely. In 1905, Victoria and Marcus became grandparents when Thomas and Sarah welcomed a son. Mary and her husband presented them with a granddaughter the following year. The cycle of life continued, each generation building on the foundation laid by those who came before. Victoria never forgot where she came from or what she had survived. The brand remained on her shoulder, a permanent reminder of both the cruelty that existed in the world and the strength required to overcome it. But when she looked in the mirror now, she did not see a woman who had been owned. She saw a survivor, a wife, a mother, a grandmother, a woman who had built a life worth living. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1904, Marcus had commissioned a portrait of their family, all 7 of them together, to hang in the main room of their house. When the artist finished and presented it to them, Victoria stared at the image in wonder. Here was the family she had built, the life she had created, the future she had fought so hard to reach. "That is who you are," Marcus had said, standing beside her as they looked at the portrait. "Not the girl who was branded in Texas, but the woman who built all of this. Never forget that." And she never did. The years continued to pass, bringing joys and sorrows as all lives do. There were weddings and births, losses and celebrations, seasons of plenty and seasons of struggle. Through it all, Victoria and Marcus remained partners in every sense of the word, facing each challenge together and celebrating each victory side by side. By 1910, as they entered their 50s, Victoria found herself content in a way she had never imagined possible during those dark days on Thornton's ranch. She was surrounded by children and grandchildren, respected in her community, secure in a love that had weathered every storm. The brand on her shoulder had become simply part of her history, no more defining than the laugh lines around her eyes or the silver threading through her hair. One evening, as they sat together watching their grandchildren play in the yard, Marcus said, "I have been thinking." "About what?" Victoria asked. "About how far we have come," he replied. "About everything we have built together. About how that moment when I saw the brand on your shoulder changed both our lives." Victoria looked at him curiously. "Changed them how?" "I think I fell in love with you that night," Marcus admitted. Seeing what you had survived, seeing that you were still standing, still fighting, still refusing to let that mark define you. I had already been attracted to you, already cared for you, but that night I understood who you truly were at your core. And I knew I wanted to spend my life with someone that strong, that brave, that determined. Victoria felt emotion well up in her chest. You gave me back my life that night, she said softly. When you said that Mark did not own me, you gave me permission to believe it myself. You helped me see that I could be more than what had been done to me. We saved each other, Marcus said simply. You needed someone to believe in you, and I needed someone to believe in. We were exactly what each other needed, exactly when we needed it. Victoria leaned against him, watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon, painting the New Mexico sky in the brilliant colors she had come to love over the decades. Around them, the sounds of family filled the air. Children laughing, horses nickering in the corrals, the familiar sounds of the ranch settling in for the evening. This was her life now. Not the nightmare she had fled, but the dream she had built. And every morning when she woke up beside Marcus, every time she gathered with her children and grandchildren, every sunset she witnessed from the porch of the home they had created together, she was reminded that survival was just the beginning. The real victory was in building something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy. The brand on her shoulder was still there, would always be there, but it no longer defined her. It was simply part of her story, a chapter she had survived and moved beyond. And when people asked about it now, she told them the truth. It was a reminder that she was stronger than anything that had tried to break her, and that love and determination could overcome even the darkest of pasts. As the sun finally slipped below the horizon and stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Victoria took Marcus's hand, their fingers intertwining in a gesture as natural as breathing after all these years together. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" Marcus asked. "For seeing me when I felt invisible, for loving me when I felt unlovable, for telling me that Mark did not own me and helping me believe it, for giving me this life, this family, this future, for everything." Marcus brought her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. "You gave me just as much," he said. "You gave me a partner, a family, a purpose. You showed me what real strength looks like, and you trusted me with your heart even when you had every reason not to trust anyone. That is a gift I will never take for granted." They sat together in the gathering darkness, two people who had found each other against impossible odds and built something that would outlast them both. The ranch around them was quiet now, peaceful, the kind of peace that comes from a life well lived and love well earned. Victoria thought back to that terrified girl who had fled Texas all those years ago, branded and broken and desperate. She thought about the journey that had brought her to Fort Stanton, to the Lucky Star Saloon, to that fateful evening when a cowboy with kind eyes had intervened on her behalf. She thought about all the moments, big and small, that had led her to this porch, this evening, this life. And she realized that while she would never be grateful for what Jacob Thornton had done to her, she could be grateful for what she had built in spite of it. The brand had not defined her. It had not owned her. It had only proven that she was capable of surviving anything and still finding joy on the other side. As they finally rose to go inside, to the warmth and light of the home they had built together, Victoria took one last look at the star-filled sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to savor. But tonight, she was simply grateful to be here, to be loved, to be free. The mark on her shoulder would fade with time, as all scars do, but the love she had built with Marcus would only grow stronger. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Not what had been done to her, but what she had chosen to do with her life afterward. Not the brand that had been forced upon her, but the family she had chosen to create. Not the ownership one man had tried to claim, but the freedom she had fought for and won. Victoria Nielsen was not defined by her worst day. She was defined by every day after, by every choice she made to keep living, keep loving, keep building. And as she walked into her home, her husband's hand warm in hers, she knew with absolute certainty that she had won. She had survived, and more than that, she had thrived. The cowboy had been right all those years ago. That mark did not own her. It never had, and it never would. She belonged to herself, and she had chosen to share her life with someone who understood that completely. And that choice had made all the difference. Their story was not about a brand or a villain or a daring escape. It was about two people who found each other when they needed it most, who built a life together based on respect and trust and genuine love. It was about family and community and the quiet strength it takes to heal from trauma. It was about understanding that the past shapes us but does not have to define us. As the years continued to pass, Victoria and Marcus grew old together on the Running Horse Ranch. They celebrated 50 years of marriage surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, economic downturns and family crises, always together, always partners. When Victoria finally passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78, Marcus was beside her, holding her hand just as he had held it through every challenge they had faced together. And when Marcus followed her just 6 months later, unable to imagine a life without his beloved wife, they were buried side by side in the ranch cemetery, their headstones simple but meaningful. Beloved wife and mother, beloved husband and father. Their children gathered at the ranch after the funeral, sharing stories about their parents, about the love that had sustained their family through generations. And when someone asked about the faded scar on Victoria's shoulder that they had glimpsed over the years, Thomas told them the story his mother had shared with him as a young man. He told them about the brand, about the escape, about the cowboy who saw past the mark to the woman beneath. He told them about courage and survival, and the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. And he told them the words his father had spoken to his mother all those years ago, words that had become family legend. That mark does not own you. Those words became a touchstone for the family, a reminder passed down through generations that people are more than their traumas, more than their scars, more than the worst things that have happened to them. Victoria and Marcus's love story became the foundation upon which their descendants built their own lives, a reminder that survival is possible, healing is real, and love can overcome even the darkest of pasts. The Running Horse Ranch continued to operate for another 3 generations before eventually being sold, but the legacy Victoria and Marcus created lived on in their descendants, in the values they instilled, in the love they demonstrated. And while the physical brand on Victoria's shoulder had long since faded into dust, the mark they left on the world through their children and their choices remained indelible. In the end, that was the truest victory. Not that Victoria survived what was done to her, though that was remarkable enough, but that she and Marcus built something beautiful together that outlasted them both. They created a family rooted in love and respect, raised children who understood the importance of compassion and strength, and demonstrated that healing from trauma is not just possible, but can be the beginning of something extraordinary. The cowboy had seen what others missed, that a brand burned into flesh is just scar tissue, and scar tissue is simply proof of survival. He had understood that ownership cannot be imposed through violence or marks or legal papers, that true belonging comes only through choice. And he had chosen Victoria, just as she had chosen him, and together they had built a life that proved love is always stronger than cruelty. Hope is always more powerful than despair, and the human spirit is capable of extraordinary resilience. Their story ended not with dramatic rescues or violent confrontations, but with something far more profound. A long life well lived, a family well loved, and a partnership that demonstrated what it truly means to see past scars to the person beneath. That mark had not owned Victoria. Nothing owned Victoria except her own fierce determination to survive and thrive. And Marcus had been the first person to recognize that truth and help her believe it herself. In the quiet moments before sleep took him that final time, Marcus's last thoughts were of Victoria. Of the first time he saw her moving through the Lucky Star saloon with grace despite her burdens. Of the moment he saw the brand and understood the depth of her courage. Of their wedding day and the births of their children, and 50 years of ordinary moments that had added up to an extraordinary life. And he thought about those words he had spoken so long ago, words that had changed both their lives. That mark does not own you. He had been right. It never had. And in the end, that simple truth had been enough to build a lifetime of love upon.